you the situation in the country on the eve of the planned protests that are set to begin tomorrow, from what we understand, at noon. The big conversation is perhaps around the state of the economy. Dr. Kerrow, maybe that's the place to, get into. I know you talked a little bit earlier about it, but just paint for us the situation. There's many that say, look, things were going to be tough for whomever took office, considering the situation in the country and, of course, external factors as well. So what is it that this administration has to deal with respect to the economy right now?
Thank you. I'm on record on this same station saying that things are going to be hard before they get better for whoever comes into office. And that was in the context when you're telling Kenyans that all these goodies you're being promised by politicians are not going to come through anytime soon. I still stand by that. But still, on the other hand, now from the same economics perspective, for me, it's not about all these taxes being proposed. It's not about the finance bill as such, but it's about the context, how it's being implemented, and the possible impact on people's lives. Like, for example, if you look at basic economics, what do you expect? There are two arms of the economy. There is the government, who does the fiscal policies, and there's a central bank that does the monetary policies. And those policies together, they shape the economic outcomes and people's livelihoods. Normally, this is what you expect in a country like Kenya. When government policies or the so-called fiscal policies are tightening like we are seeing, we expect that the monetary policies by the central bank try to loosen so that they provide a cushion and they keep the private sector thriving. We are in a situation whereby the government is tightening the policies through the taxation, through reduced expenditures because of the consolidation measures. And the central bank at the same time is also tightening the monetary policies, raising the central bank rate. And now last night I heard that we are overbanked. I was like, goodness, they're not stopping. Because if he says that we are overbanked, he is saying that we've got too many banks in this economy, and therefore he stated himself that he needs mergers. In other words, he wants the banking sector to become, the banks in Kenya to be so small in a way that they can form a WhatsApp group of about 15, 20 managers, whichever number, and call each other and say, hey guys, what interest rates are we charging this time? And they can fix them. So competition is going to be a thing of the past. So if you competition in the banking sector, as long as we have these mergers coming together, it's going to be a thing of the past, making interest rates very high for Kenyans. Now, that is my biggest problem, that the implementation of these policies, they are not sound. And when you ask them, so why did you increase the interest rates, for example, the monetary policies? They'll tell you that it's because we want to reduce access to loanable funds so that people reduce their consumption, and that will reduce the demand for goods and services, and that will push prices down, and everybody is happy. And I'm like, isn't that classical economics? And have you looked at the assumptions that where that theory works? It assumes a perfectly competitive market for that to work, like you said. Is Kenya at that level? There are so many constraints and bottlenecks and market imperfections in this economy, to the extent that when you are given that explanation and you're an economist, you're like, which economists are advising whoever is talking? Because they are not in touch with the realities of this Kenyan economy. So that is my biggest problem with the whole thing. It's about the way it's being implemented and what I see from a professional economics perspective.
What does that do, Billow Kerrow, for the average mwananchi? So you've got, as Dr. Kerrow says, tightening on both ends. What is the resultant effect, on those of us who are, in the economy?
When you tighten liquidity, in the market, what you're essentially doing is, which I'm sure they're looking at the inflation aspect of it, but when you do that, what you're doing is you're going to reduce spending. And when you reduce spending, you're going to reduce demand for goods and services. You're going to put production down. But my look at all this thing is this government really is not had time to listen to Kenyans. They didn't get time to listen to businessmen, to our industries, and to understand exactly how to handle this economy. We are seeing a situation where it's a bandage, a Panadol kind of situation. Because when you look at the fundamentals of this economy, things are not going right. You look at the exchange rate is going crazy. You look at the interest rates are going up. Inflation is still very high. You look at all the fundamentals, the public debt is going up, everything, and then you're adding, the tax. So I think the whole approach to the economy, they need to go back to the drawing board. They can't get us out of the hole we are in. For the public, the bottom line is you're going to lose jobs. If the finance bill is implemented, for example, manufacturers alone sat in front of the MPs and told them, if you implement this thing, housing levy alone, we are going to lose up to 6,000 jobs in the manufacturing sector alone. I mean, look at some of the many other sectors that have been affected by the finance bill. So what will happen? We are going to lose jobs. Mm-hmm. We are going to reduce incomes because no business wants to simply pay people and they don't make anything on the bottom line. You're going to lose income. You're going to make things very expensive. That is the bottom line. The cost of living, every shilling you charge of tax, at the end of the day, it goes to the consumer. So it is not, it's not the time. I mean, they took over an economy that was in a bad shape. So you should have waited for the economy to try and change how to grow the economy. Once the economy starts growing, jobs start coming up, incomes are increasing, demand for goods and services. Right now, I'm in business. Many businesses are operating at, especially manufacturing, at less than 40% capacity. The demand is simply not there. People have no purchasing power. And with this kind of finance act, you're playing to IMF, but you forget that you have a nation to run. You have people who have no jobs, who have no food. The cost of living is going to be very expensive. Everything is going up. So I think they need to go to the drawing board. I think they did not really get to listen. And this was the mistake of the previous administration. They didn't want to listen. And I thought, and one of the things I have been writing on before even these guys were sworn is that they should listen to Kenyans. Because if you don't listen, you run a risk of doing things that may not be the appropriate solution to the challenges that we have. And even today, as these demonstrations go on, one would think that some of the demonstrations we have seen in some of the regions in this country on Wednesday were spontaneous. There are regions that have never been out. And you would, when you get to talk to people, you find people genuinely complaining about the cost of living, lack of jobs, things are expensive. The purchasing power is down, situation is bad. So I think even now they need to listen. It's not about opposition it's about the people. I think we need to look at the economy. In my view, the situation is not that good. And I don't agree always with what the government has said regarding these taxes.
Yeah.
The main argument was we will reduce loans. For us to reduce loans, we have to raise taxes. But when you look at the loan book now, in the last 9 months, and it's grown the fastest probably at any time in the last 10 years, growing nearly 1 trillion in just 9 months. So I think we need to go back. We need to go back and have a conversation about how to grow this economy. This is the most important thing.
Okay. Is this a governance issue, Diana, from where you sit? And perhaps Billow can also touch on this in a moment, because he dabbled in the political sphere at some point, in his career. But, what is at the heart of all of these issues? Because we can talk about fiscal policy, monetary policy, tightening of budgets. So what's a government to do? And how are they to address those very key issues facing Kenyans?
Whenever a leader or a government is faced with a crisis, the first place we must start is trust building. In the current economic and governance, it's both. it's both an economic and governance crisis, the government ought to first invest in confidence building, so that then from there we start deploying the leadership and governance principles in our constitution. This is a time when the government must become very, very, very transparent with the people. If you come and pronounce that you have reduced on loans, and then immediately soon thereafter, we get a record from Treasury that loans have gone up, then you lose trust completely. You come at the beginning of your rule or of your term after the election, and you announce to the country, we are doing badly, so I will cut on budgets. Then what do we see? The office of the president, their expenditure goes up. You immediately lose trust. And I think the election period and the campaign period, one of the things that was communicated very clearly by Kenya Kwanza is we will respect the rule of law. We will listen to the people. When we are in power, freedom will mean participation of the lowest or the most excluded people from governance, hustlers. If you betray that covenant, then you have a governance crisis. And the institutions that are supposed to be running and bringing us back to the right path, from policing institution, the Inspector General, it was announced that the police will now be independent. Their conduct in the last 2 months point more to direct control by the executive as opposed to the independence that they are supposed to be serving Kenyans around security. Other institutions that ought to be steering us through this particular crisis, the Office of the Auditor General. This is an office that ought to guide us around, are we getting value for money? Do we have a clear debt register? First, we get a pronunciation that it is not very clear whether we have a debt register or not. The Auditor General's report, most of them are lying in Parliament. Some of them for as long as 10 years. An audit report for any company, it's not what the auditor says. It is until it is handed to the people who are in charge of governance. The people who are in charge of our audit reports are Parliament. Why are audit reports still lying there unconcluded? That creates a huge governance crisis, and it's part of the mess that we are in, both economically and in terms of the legislative and oversight steps that we ought to have undertaken. The controller of budget flags very, very many payments that are illegal and irregular. Where does that go? It's a headline one day, and then we move on swiftly. Very soon, if it was an issue of pending bills, we will even get a way of negotiating it in a bipartisan way. What is this that the task force on pending bills will resolve that was not highlighted by the governance institutions around our public finance? From the Public Procurement Regulatory Authority, the Controller of Budget, the Auditor General. So what is this other solution? Some counties have even done their own independent audit. So we are truly in a governance crisis. And for me, this is what resembles 2007, where we went into...
That's a big indictment, 2007.
Yes, because there was no institution that could steer this.
But we have institutions now, Diane.
We have institutions.
We have independent constitutional commissions and all of these.
Very independent on paper. But when it comes to their action, and if we were to evaluate, most of them have been there for the last 10 years, or even just the last 2 years. Let's try and name one independent institution that Kenyans can vouch for their independence, and that has been continually supported. Parliament is supposed to be independent. The judiciary is independent and tries as much as possible to be independent. But think about all these other offices that are supposed to create confidence. Inspector General, Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, NGEC. But maybe Faith will guide us.
Will give us faith on some of those. Because please, you've mentioned all of those institutions, and perhaps one of them is the judiciary, to which Kenyans will be looking to in the determination of the case that has been raised against the Finance Act 2023. I am aware we cannot discuss the merits and the demerits of the case, so we will not go deep into that. But Faith, maybe you can sort of lay out for us what the issues will be that the judges will have to determine. Now we've got the 3-judge bench. They will soon be announcing, the dates of hearing, the matters before them. What are those matters that the judges must look at and make a decision on?
Yvonne, what they'll be grappling upon, amongst other issues, is that first, it's been challenged on both procedural irregularities and substantive irregularities. So looking procedurally, the courts will have to look and answer the question as to whether was this a bill that is a county bill, or is it a bill that was supposed to be presented before the National Assembly? Because the law provides that if the same ought to be decided by both the Speaker of the National Assembly and the Speaker of the Senate before they can determine where it falls. And that wasn't done. And, under the law, housing is part and parcel a county responsibility. And therefore, the fact that it wasn't placed before Senate, then that raises a question and a query. The housing, other issues that the courts will have to determine is about the housing, public participation. Now, the creature called the housing levy started as a housing fund. It was explained to Kenyans. It went through public participation, but later on, after the report was tabled from the Departmental Committee on Finance, it came back as a housing levy. Now the question is, was this housing levy placed for public participation? Because what is public participation? You have to table what bill you're presenting. So what is this? What is the aim that it's supposed to achieve? And at the end of the day, how will it impact you? Then Kenyans will be able to give their views and respond to the same. Now, Kenyans gave their views on the housing fund, but now this is a housing levy. So was there public participation?
Okay.
There are also inclusions on what will be required on the VAT, on various goods and services that the question is, were they sneaked in? Because the petition has highlighted several changes that were not in the original bill when it went for public participation.
Okay.
And so after, and it just went to the second and the third reading. So the question is that adequate public participation? When there are changes, should it go back to the people? And the second thing also on public participation that I think has been captured well by the media is that most members of the public say that this was placed before them. They gave their views and they say they don't want this. It'll affect them and they don't want this. The question is, were those views considered? Now,
so it will be on the threshold of public participation.
Yes.
And whether their views are binding.
You don't have to take the views, but have you considered those views? Did you give a report to indicate how you considered those views and why you're saying, yes, this was tabled before us, we looked at it, however, 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
So those are also questions that will be brought on the merits of whether there was proper public participation or not. And also other substantive law changes on tax, and the question of whether it meets the threshold, whether it's constitutional or not. So those are part and parcel of the issues that will be presented before the courts. and we are
which the three
eagerly
judges.
waiting.
Yes, I think without a doubt, this Finance Act 2023 has been the most debated, most discussed by just about everybody, I think more than any other time.
And let me just add in,
yeah.
Billow Kerrow,
Billow Kerrow, yes.
Billow Kerrow raises something that is quite important. With regards to the employment, it's been placed under the Employment Act. So also the question, is that the right place? Now, government, the national government can only bring in policy in terms of what is their role. Now, it's up to the counties on how the law should be implemented. Now, when you place this responsibility on the employer to not only, you force the employer to not only provide housing, but also go a further step to deduct this amount of money, and they also have to contribute to it.
Yeah.
And secondly, also you remove the question of choice. Do I want this housing that is being tabled before me? There are others who have already taken mortgages. So what
those are
happens?
the questions.
Those are other questions.
Okay,
yeah.
that's that the judges will have to grapple with. That is Presiding Justice David Majanja, Christine Meoli, and Lawrence Mugambi. They will be announcing the date of that. Look, there's much more to talk about, including where the solutions lie. We have sort of laid out, the economic issues, but is that the only issue? Are there other issues on the table? And are there any mid-term, short-term, long-term solutions? What can be done right now? What is being done? What is yet to be done? Even as those protests